Hi students, my name is Professor Kshitij Bansal. I teach law at Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University. The module we are going to discuss today is about farmers' rights. What are the learning outcomes we are intending to have from this module? The objective of this chapter is to examine what are the rights of the farmers that are recognized by law and how is it a group right. Students will be able to find out whether farmers' rights are group rights and why. They will also realize the difficulty in defining farmer. They're asked to find out their own definition. Farmers are the backbone of any country due to two reasons. One is they are the producers of the food without which life cannot be sustained. The other is they also contribute to the economy of the nation by producing crops of export importance. Apart from these, there are other new areas which are attributable as the farmer's contribution. This is their role as preserves of the plant genetic resources, which are used by scientists or corporations to innovate new plant varieties on which they get the right called plant breeders' rights. They also conserve the biological diversity. Because of all these, the role of the farmer is more important than any other segment of the society, though the paradox is that they are the most exploited, tortured and neglected except during the reign of Chandragupta Maurya. Who is a farmer? Before we proceed to find out the rights of farmers, it is imperative to examine who is a farmer. This question assumes importance because there are a lot of persons who are connected with farming, with or without having land property, who are working with or without in a farm. They can be classified as the agricultural laborers. They are having no ownership or possession of land and thus they do not employ anybody to work in their land. However, they go for work in others' land. Second, the poor farmer. As the name indicates, they are called farmers as they own or possess land, however small the area may be. They work in their own land but do not employ anybody else to work in their land. And as their income from their small holding is so meager, they work in others' land also. The third is a medium farmer. He is also owning or possessing land, works in his own land, does not employ anyone in his land, and the difference with the second type is that he does not work in others' land. The fourth is a rich farmer. The rich farmer, who has almost all the characteristics of the medium farmers, differs only in that he employs others in his land, as he has more area of land and cannot manage it alone. The capitalist farmer lord is the fifth kind. These types of farmers, who are almost like the bourgeois in the language of Karl Marx, own huge areas of land, do not work in the land but employ others in the land. Here he, though not working at all, he makes others work and he lives like a parasite, is still doing something in his land in the process of production. The sixth is the feudal farmer lord. In this type of farmer is seen as the gravest form of exploiter in the language of Marx, as he never does anything towards production, rather just uses his land as a means to make money, and the money lenders do with money. This type of farmer never keeps the land with himself. Though he owns handsome acres of land, neither works on the land nor employs anyone to work on it. He gives it for lease and collects money from the lessee. This classification shows that there are people who really toil in the scorching sun and produce food products. This paper focuses primarily on farmers who produce crops and those who do not do anything in the soil but let others work and make money out of it. So, while the question of rights of farmers arise, their relationship with the land matters a lot. Now the question is, who should be considered as farmers among this qualification? The answer lies in the fact that farmers' rights are not independent rights. They came into existence only in the context of plant breeders' rights. Plant breeders' rights, which we would refer to as PBR, is an intellectual property right given to a plant breeder who has developed a new, distinct, uniform and stable variety of a plant. This is a temporarily given intellectual property which excludes others from doing certain things about the new variety without the consent of the plant holder. This is right almost like a patent, right? It remains a fact that varieties are developed using the plant genetic resources of the wild varieties which are preserved by farmers. and sometimes by using the traditional knowledge held by them. Plant genetic resources mean that part of the plant which is capable of being reproduced. For example, in the case of a coconut, the dried coconut which is capable of being sprouting to a new coconut tree is the plant genetic resource, whereas in the case of plants like hibiscus or rose, the matured stem in the PGR, because they are used to reproduce that plant. Traditional knowledge is the knowledge, innovations and practices of indigenous and local communities around the world, developed from experience gained over centuries and adapted to the local culture and environment. Traditional knowledge is transmitted orally from generation to generation. It tends to be collectively owned and takes the form of stories, songs, folklore, proverbs, cultural values, beliefs, rituals, customs, community laws, local language, agricultural practices, including the development of plant species and animal breeds. Traditional knowledge is mainly of a practical nature, particularly in such fields as agriculture, fisheries, health, horticulture, and forestry. When a plant breeder develops a new variety, the knowledge of a peculiarity of a plant helps him to save his time and energy in inventing the new plant. For example, if it is known that a particular vegetable has the capacity to cure a disease and another vegetable has a capacity to resist the disease, the plant breeder can think of developing a new variety of vegetable by a combination of the quality of these two vegetable plants. If he were to first find out the disease curing and resisting capacity of the plant, it would have taken triple time for him to develop the new variety. This makes the plant breeder owe to the farmers who preserve this traditional knowledge. Thus, there arises a need to give the farmers certain rights related to the holding of traditional knowledge. But then the question is, who are the owners of plant genetic resources and traditional knowledge, especially when it is related to the 6 categories of persons who are related to agriculture mentioned above? The agricultural laborer works in the field of another person who owns the land. If he has preserved the plant genetic resource, for example, a variety of rice, who owns it then? The owner of that rice will definitely be the owner of the land. However, if he knows the traditional knowledge about a plant, the owner of the land will have nothing to do with it, as he may not be engaged in farming at all. This situation creates a position that, though the owner of traditional knowledge may be the agricultural laborer, he will not be the owner of plant genetic resource, though he is the preserver. But in the case of a poor farmer, a medium farmer, and the rich farmer are persons who own the PGR and also do the farming, can be said to have preserved the PGR and the traditional knowledge. Regarding the capitalist farmer and the feudal farmer lord, they own the land, but they have done nothing to preserve or conserve either the traditional knowledge or PGR, but by virtue of being the owners of the land, they own the PGR. So if the ownership of traditional knowledge and plant genetic resource, that is PGR, is linked with the ownership of the land, and if the ownership of the efforts of preserving and conserving the PGR is equated with the ownership of the material in PGR, effort is that of a person who really worked in the farm, but the product is with the owner of the land. The farmer's rights and the resulting benefits will go to the owner of the land, while the efforts that are tried to be awarded are actually that of the person who really worked in the land. It is this frustration that demands the definition of a farmer, which you should be curious about, in order to find out who will get the benefit of the farmer's rights, and to see that it goes to the right person. In that sense, farmer needs to be defined in a different manner from the existing definitions. First, let us look at the existing definitions to find out whether they're adequate. The Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act 2001, a landmark legislation of India, defines a farmer as any person who cultivates crops either by cultivating the land himself or cultivates crops by directly supervising the cultivation of land through any other person, or conserves and preserves, severally or jointly with any person, any wild species or traditional varieties, or adds value to such wild species or traditional varieties through selection and identification of their useful properties. This legislation defines even an agricultural laborer as a farmer, as the only ingredient necessary is cultivation of crops, irrespective of the ownership over the land. However, even a landlord is defined as a farmer even if he does not cultivate it himself but only supervises. An addition that is found in this definition is a person who conserves and preserves or adds value to wild or traditional varieties, he's also considered a farmer. This is a change in the definition of the farmer which is caused due to the new plant breeders' rights, and as this act deals with plant breeder rights as well, in this change is also adopted in the definition. Actually, farmers require rights during two stages. One is when they want to seek access to the PGR of the PBR protected plant, and when the plant breeders seek access to PGR of the farmers. In the first stage, what the farmers require is the right to have free access to the PGR of the protected variety, and in the second stage, the farmers need two rights. They should be considered as the owner of the PGR which they preserved, and as a consequence, their consent must be asked before the PGR is accessed, and they must get a share of the benefit which accrue or actually accrue to the plant breeder who accesses it. Thus, the concepts are prior informed consent and the right to benefit sharing as a corollary of the property right. Along with these, all the rights that are attached to the owner of a property must also be given to them. This is also, as evident from the nature of the holders, is collective in nature. It might not have been held even by contemporaries. So identifying a particular person as holding this right is impossible. For example, if a group of farmers know a particular quality of a plant towards the climate, and a plant breeder uses this knowledge to develop a new variety, who should be given this reward for having known this quality and to have maintained this knowledge? It is impossible to identify any single individual in this regard. This makes this right of the farmer a group right. Thus, there arises the need to recognize the efforts put by the farmers in preserving these two, the plant genetic resource and the traditional knowledge. It is this compulsion that gives rise to farmers' rights in the international scenario. Thus, it is different from giving the farmers any right for any invention, but it is for his preserving a part of the natural thing for mankind, for making it available to the mankind for further development. Actually, the trace of farmers' rights could be seen in the International Treaty for the Protection of Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which says the contracting parties agree that the responsibility for realizing farmers' rights as they relate to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture rests with national governments. In accordance with their needs and priorities, each contracting party should, as appropriate and subject to its national legislation, take measures to protect and promote farmers' rights, including protection of traditional knowledge relevant to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the right to equitably participating in sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the right to participate in making decisions at the national level on matters related to the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. If these are the rights that are to be given to the farmers, then the definition of the farmer should also in such a manner that those who preserve the TK and PGR should get the protection and not the owners of the land. Thus, there is a need to have a proper definition of farmers so that conservers and preservers of traditional knowledge and plant genetic resource get protection irrespective of their ownership of the land. Property right over plant genetic resource and traditional knowledge as a group right is our next discussion. The problem of recognizing this right as a group is due to two reasons. One is it does not fit into the concept of property and the rights of owners in the normal sense. Second, there are a lot of practical problems involved in the realization of this right. The bundle of rights of the owner of a property are the right to possess a thing, the right to use and enjoy that thing, the right to consume, destroy, or alienate that thing, the characteristic of being indeterminate in duration, and last, the residuary character. But when it is a collective property, no single individual can do either of these things. Thus, this collective right may not be even qualified to be a property as per the existing notion of property. However, taking into account the purpose of recognizing this right, it has to be recognized as a property. The purpose is to reward the farmers for having conserved and preserved the PGR for so long and for preventing their property being taken away without their consent. So the purpose is not to alienate, or sell the property, just to identify the owner and to ask for their permission for taking their property, and to give a share of benefit that will accrue to the person or persons who takes the PGR from them. So it is always possible to recognize collective ownership, as was the case in India before the British invasion. It is a fact that before the concept of individualistic or private ownership came in, there was a property jurisprudence based on collective ownership, as was advocated by Segal. He observed that if a cultivator shares with other members of the community, he may be said to hold the land for the benefit of all. The important question is not who occupies the soil, but what is done with the fruits of the soil. This shows that collective ownership is possible, as the objective of giving property right over PGRFA and TK is for retaining them. This discussion suggests that there is a jurisprudential basis for collecting property right, even those which are inalienable. Let us conclude this discussion by saying farmers are obviously the most segment of the society, we don't dispute that, but their efforts go unnoticed. While the plant breeders are given intellectual property rights for their efforts to develop a new variety using the existing variety, which is preserved and conserved by the farmers, the latter is not rewarded in any way. There is a strong vacuum in the law, both domestic and international. The farmer's rights is recognized directly and indirectly in international laws, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, we popularly call it the CBD, the International Treaty on the Protection of Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and the national laws in India like the Biological Diversity Act and the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. We would discuss in the next chapter the Convention on Biological Diversity, where we would examine what extent is the group right of farmer recognized and the measures which are taken to protect them, and to examine where the measures are adequate or inadequate. I hope this discussion was useful for you to understand the meaning and the extent of farmers' rights. Thank you.